A coronial inquest into the 2021 murder of Gold Coast mother Kelly Wilkinson has begun. The three-day hearing will probe Queensland Police's response to domestic violence complaints made before she was killed by her estranged husband, who was inappropriately granted bail just days before her death.
Kelly Wilkinson was just 27 years old when she was brutally killed by her estranged husband, Brian Earl Johnston. The mother of three was stabbed and set alight at her Arundel home on April 20, 2021. Nearly 5 years on, a coronial inquest on the Gold Coast has commenced. Kelly's family was present for the proceedings as Queensland Police is put under the microscope for the handling of domestic violence complaints made prior to her death.
Every time she went in there and tried to make a statement of he's breached, it was sort of just not recognised and not heard or validated.
Before dawn on April 20th, 2021, firefighters were called to a Gold Coast home in Arundel, Australia. In the backyard, they found 27-year-old Kelly Wilkinson, critically injured and badly burned. She would not survive. Just hours earlier, Kelly had been alive, a mother of three who had repeatedly sought protection from her estranged husband, Brian Earl Johnston. Now, the woman who had warned others she was afraid was fighting for her life. But this was only the beginning of a tragedy that had been building for months. What happened to Kelly, and why wasn't she protected? Kelly Wilkinson's story had begun years before that terrible morning. In 2011, at just 18, Kelly met Brian Earl Johnston online. He was a former U.S. Marine, and their relationship moved quickly. They married soon afterward, and Kelly eventually moved to the United States, where they had 2 children. But within several years, the marriage had deteriorated. In 2017, Kelly returned to Australia with her young son and daughter. The relationship would later resume, and the couple had a third child. By 2021, however, Kelly wanted out again. After her mother's death, she confided in her sisters that Johnston was abusive and controlling. She told him she wanted to separate and asked him to leave. For Kelly, leaving was supposed to be the beginning of freedom. Instead, it became the most dangerous chapter of her life. The warning signs were becoming impossible to ignore. Kelly had told her family she was afraid of Johnston and wanted them to know if anything happened to her. Police had also become involved after concerns about the relationship, and a protection order was eventually granted, restricting Johnston from approaching or contacting her. But the danger did not disappear. Kelly continued reporting concerns about contact involving Johnston. In the weeks before her death, police interactions with the couple would later become the subject of a coronial inquest examining whether opportunities to protect Kelly had been missed. And somewhere beneath those warnings, Johnston was unraveling. He was facing serious allegations, feared the consequences, and according to evidence later presented in court, had begun making disturbing statements about his future. Kelly was trying to escape. Johnston was preparing for something far darker. In the early hours of April 20th, 2021, Brian Johnston made his way toward Kelly's home. The court later found that he had gone there intending to kill her and then take his own life. He was carrying weapons, duct tape, other items, and a 20-liter container of petrol. Kelly was in her own backyard when he attacked. He stabbed her repeatedly, leaving 8 stab wounds, before pouring petrol over her and setting her on fire. Neighbors heard screams. One desperately tried to fight the flames with a garden hose. Johnston also caught fire and fled, badly injured. Police later found him nearby and took him to hospital. Kelly was dead. And investigators were about to uncover just how deliberately the attack had been prepared. The investigation quickly turned toward Brian Johnston. He had survived the fire, but his injuries led police directly to him. While investigators worked to reconstruct the attack, attention turned to the disturbing preparation that had preceded it. Johnston had not simply appeared at Kelly's home empty-handed. Evidence later presented in court showed that petrol and other items had been obtained before the killing. Investigators also examined Johnston's movements and his connection to Bradley Bell, a work colleague who admitted driving Johnston toward Kelly's home and obtaining petrol. Bell's involvement would later become a separate courtroom battle. The evidence was beginning to reveal a horrifying possibility: Kelly's murder had not been an impulsive act. It had been prepared in advance. As investigators pieced together the events surrounding Kelly's death, the case against Johnston became increasingly difficult to escape. The evidence showed that he had traveled to Kelly's home carrying items that could be used in the attack, including weapons, duct tape, and petrol. Johnston himself had survived with severe burns and was taken to hospital under police guard. Another man, Bradley Bell, became entangled in the investigation. Prosecutors alleged that Bell had helped Johnston reach Kelly's home and obtain petrol, knowing what Johnston intended to do. Bell denied knowing about any plan to murder Kelly. His case would eventually reach trial, where the evidence would be tested in court. For Johnston, however, the path was already clear. The investigation had transformed a horrifying crime scene into a case of deliberate murder. The courtroom eventually became the place where the final pieces of Kelly's story were examined. Brian Johnston pleaded guilty to murdering Kelly Wilkinson, accepting responsibility for the killing rather than forcing her family through a murder trial. The court heard that he had planned the attack and had armed himself before going to Kelly's home. His actions were not treated as a sudden loss of control, but as a deliberate decision that ended a young mother's life. In March 2024, Johnston was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 20 years before he could be considered for parole. But another courtroom battle remained. Bradley Bell, accused of helping Johnston, maintained that he did not know a murder was going to happen. And in September 2024, a jury found Bell not guilty of both murder and manslaughter. For Kelly's family, however, no verdict could change what had already been taken from them. For Kelly's family, the years after her murder became a painful search for answers. Her children were left to grow up without their mother, while those closest to Kelly were forced to confront a question that refused to disappear: could her death have been prevented? That question became central to a coronial inquest examining the police response to Kelly's reports of domestic violence and the handling of Johnston before the murder. The inquest heard allegations about missed opportunities and decisions made in the days before Kelly died. For her loved ones, these proceedings were never simply about paperwork or procedure. They were about Kelly. A daughter. A sister. A mother of 3. A woman who had been afraid, and whose fear ultimately became tragically real. Kelly Wilkinson's murder left behind more than a crime scene. It left 3 children without their mother, a family carrying grief, and a community forced to confront the devastating consequences of domestic violence. Brian Johnston is serving a life sentence for her murder. But Kelly's story continues beyond the courtroom because the questions surrounding the warnings before her death remain deeply painful. She had tried to protect herself. She had expressed fear. And still, on that April morning, the danger reached her. Perhaps the most haunting question is not simply why Kelly was killed, but whether something could have been done before it was too late. What do you think? Could Kelly's death have been prevented? If this story moved you, please like, share, subscribe to Crimevault, and turn on notifications for more true crime stories.